Hi, it's Katrina. There are so many myths and mysteries surrounding archaeology and discoveries. Finding an artifact is like solving an ancient puzzle, and not all of the pieces make sense. Sometimes you wonder, are they even real? From an old papyrus saying aliens visited Egypt to the Nazis using ancient monuments to their own advantage, here are some controversial discoveries that are sure to stir things up. If that sounds good, be sure to subscribe and let me know your thoughts about all this in the comments.
Nazi archaeology.
What did the Nazis have to do with archaeology? In Adolf Hitler's rush to prove that the German people were descendants of an Aryan race, he pushed his Nazi scientists to make archaeological discoveries. Of all the evil regimes in history, the Nazis may have been the most obsessed with digging up ancient treasures.
In 1933, Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany and the official leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. One of his first acts of business was to change the school curriculum. You can't brainwash a generation without changing the curriculum a little bit. Hitler forced schools across the country to teach that Germanic people came from an ancient superior race that he called the Aryans. Hitler wasn't the first one to think this up, but he was the first one to take it as far as he did. Changing the curriculum wouldn't be enough. Hitler needed proof to help fuel his propaganda machine. He sent teams of archaeologists to remote sites across the world to start digging up pieces of the past.
The organization responsible for these projects was the Ancestral Heritage Research and Teaching Society, also called the Ahnenerbe. It was founded by Heinrich Himmler in 1935. The society sent archaeologists to Bulgaria, Croatia, Greece, Russia, Africa, and Iceland.
Iceland was particularly interesting for the Nazis because they believed it was the real location of Tula, a place everyone else thought was a myth. The Nazis believed that Tula was where the Aryan race was born. The first Aryans were gods like Thor and Odin, with Thor's hammer being a real weapon the Nazis could use if they could only find it. The expedition to Iceland was an utter failure. The team claimed that they found a cave used by ancient Aryans as a place of worship, but it was never proven. The US and England later established themselves in Iceland, preventing German teams from any additional exploration.
In 1940, just after Germany invaded Poland, a team of archaeologists were sent on a very important mission. Hitler wanted them to find archaeological proof that Germans had already been living in Poland for centuries before. Hitler figured this would give them a legitimate reason for their invasion. But in the end, archaeologists never found anything.
Throughout almost the entire reign of the Third Reich, Nazi archaeologists like Hermann Wirth searched for Atlantis. The belief amongst those of the Ahnenerbe was that Atlantis existed 25,000 years ago. They thought it was the birthplace of the Nordic and Aryan races. They conducted archaeological digs across the Mediterranean. Before the war even kicked off, the Germans were already in Iraq, in the ancient city of Babylon, tearing down ancient walls and stealing gates. The Ishtar Gate is on display at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin to this day. The gate was within the inner city of Babylon, built in 569 BC by biblical king Nebuchadnezzar II. It was excavated by Robert Koldewey starting in 1904. Later on, the Germans smuggled pieces of the gate and its processional way down the Euphrates River and onto German ships.
Iraq keeps asking for the pieces back, but Germany refuses. They asked most recently in 2002 and then in 2009, but Germany says, no way, the gate stays in Berlin. The big question is, do you think they should keep it or return it? Many countries are fighting over ancient artifacts that were removed when the world was different. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below.
The mystery of the Tuli manuscript.
Were there really unidentified objects flying over ancient Egypt? This ancient manuscript is going to make you rethink what you know about the ancient world. It isn't just an old piece of text. This mysterious manuscript could be the first written account of a UFO sighting ever.
It's called the Tuli Papyrus, and nobody knows exactly where it came from. The story of the document begins in 1933 when Alberto Tuli, the director of the Egyptian section of the Vatican Museum, visited Cairo.
The Vatican and ancient Egypt have some very weird connections.
In an antique shop, Tuli came across an intriguing papyrus scroll. He was so curious that he took it home to investigate, but shortly after that, he died. The papyrus ended up in the hands of his brother, who also tragically died shortly after. For 20 years, the scroll then collected dust. Then it came into the possession of Italian Egyptologist Boris de Radziwiłł. Boris claimed that he found Tuli's original translation of the papyrus. Here are some lines of the translation for you, and then let me know what you think. On the 22nd year and the 3rd month of winter, on the 6th hour of the day, a chronicler of the House of Life discovered a strange disk approaching from the sky. It had no head. The breath from its mouth emitted an unpleasant odor. It was roughly 50 meters long, 5 meters wide. It had no voice, and it headed towards the king's house. Doesn't that kind of sound like a UFO arriving in Egypt and going straight towards the pharaoh's palace? The whole emitting breath from its mouth part seems to be describing an energy discharge, like fumes. The translation goes on to say that after several days passed, the mysterious object in the sky multiplied. There were hundreds of them shining as bright or brighter than the sun, so many that they extended to all 4 corners of the sky. It was an alien invasion. The translation continues, saying that soldiers and the pharaoh watched together. Fish fell from the sky. The pharaoh ordered incense to be burned to soothe the hearts of the gods. Everyone in Egypt seemed to be witnessing an alien fleet in the heavens. And that's it. That's the whole Tuli papyrus. It's believed the event described occurred around 1480 BC, when Thutmose III ruled Egypt. Although there have been a lot of interpretations of what happened that day, the most controversial of all is the alien interpretation. The few passages of the ancient scroll sound like the beginning scene of an apocalyptic alien invasion of planet Earth.
The interpretation isn't the only thing that's controversial about the papyrus. The biggest issue is that nobody alive today has been able to verify the passages because the Tuli papyrus isn't around anymore. Nobody knows what happened to it or where it is now. Many mainstream scientists have called it a silly hoax. What do you think happened to the Tuli papyrus? Do you think it actually existed? And now for number 9, but first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a big shout-out to Luciano Colonel for your generous super thanks. It really means a lot. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family.
Hattusa and the mysterious green stone.
There is a stone in central Turkey that looks like a mythical sword should be stuck in it. It's a huge green rock that doesn't make any sense. For years, it's left historians scratching their heads. Let's see if you and I can uncover the truth of the green stone.
The ancient stone is located in the ruins of the Hittite Empire's capital, Hattusa. The rare and beautiful rock, sometimes called the wish stone, is a total enigma. Here's why.
It doesn't look like any other rock within the ruins of the city. Researchers don't know how the rock was carried to the site. They don't know what it was used for. According to Associate Professor Andreas Schachner, it doesn't even have any valuable properties. It's just big and green, and maybe a little bit magical. But you know, these days science and magic are much more separate than they used to be.
Let's explore a little bit about Hattusa and the Hittites. Maybe it will help us understand the myth behind the stone. You've likely heard of the Hittites before, since they are also mentioned in the Bible. In West Asia, meaning modern Turkey, they were one of the earliest major civilizations. They came from somewhere near the Black Sea more than 4,000 years ago. Then they split into a number of interconnected kingdoms, including the kingdoms of Kusara and Kanesh. At the center of this vast empire was Hattusa, the city founded around 1650 BC. Here's a name you likely haven't heard of before: Supi Louis Luima I. He was king of the Hittite Empire when they reached their peak in the 14th century BC. They had conquered almost all of Anatolia and huge portions of Mesopotamia. The Hittites also waged wars against Egypt, the Assyrians, and the Matadi Empire. Sadly for them, all the fighting left them crippled. The Assyrians obliterated the Hittites in the 12th century BC, and from there they fractured into smaller and weaker independent states.
Prior to archaeological discoveries at the end of the 19th century, the only information about the Hittites came from the Bible. The Bible said no Hittite king could compare in power to the king of Judah. But archaeology has since proven, with much controversy, that the Hittites were far more powerful than Judah.
Let's dig into their greatest city. Hattusa, despite having been destroyed thousands of years ago, is still somewhat standing. It covers a massive area of 400 acres and boasts more than 30 temples. The biggest of them all is the Great Temple. It stands on a huge platform and measures more than 215 feet long. The Hittites gathered in the temple to worship Tarhuna, the storm god, and Ariniti, the sun goddess. The green stone stands in front of the Great Temple, but why? Some believe that it grants wishes. Others think it was used in religious ceremonies. The only thing known for sure is that the stone is made from nephrite, which is a dark green mineral. In 2019, Schachner made some controversial remarks. He said that the stone was likely used not only by the Hittites, but by all the civilizations who came after them. As long as humans lived in the city, they practically worshipped the stone. India's sunken city of gods.
One of the most controversial ruins in the world is located off the western coast of India, sitting at the bottom of the sea. Experts can't agree on if the city was lost recently, a few centuries ago, or if it predates any known civilization in India. The remains of the sunken city were identified at the bottom of the Gulf of Cambay by marine archaeologists using sonar scans. They beamed sound waves to the bottom of the sea, which picked up massive geometric structures.
There is no doubt that a city once stood here. The geometric structures are what experts believe to be the ruins of palaces, neighborhoods, temples, and fortifications. They span an area of about 5 miles in length. This city was colossal, potentially larger than any city in the world at the time of its construction. The controversial part is trying to figure out when the city stood and what happened to it. Many, like pseudo-archaeologist Graham Hancock, have suggested the ruins are more than 9,500 years old. If true, whoever built this city belonged to a culture that predates the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, and India's own Indus Valley civilization.
Graham Hancock has been endlessly ridiculed by mainstream scientists as a hack and a fraud, but he does have some interesting ideas. He didn't get a Netflix show for nothing. One of the things Graham often says is that the world was forged by the ending of the Ice Age.
What Graham means is that when the Ice Age came to an end, the ice caps melted, raising the sea levels by about 400 feet. All the coastal areas of the world were swallowed, with the people who lived there eaten by the sea. Their cities were utterly destroyed. One of Graham's theories is that when this happened, a huge portion of the human race was lost. Places like Atlantis were submerged and destroyed. Think about cities today. Where are the biggest concentrations of humans? Many of them are all along the coasts, near water. If the sea were to rise by 400 feet right now, a huge portion of humanity would be lost. Cities like Bangkok, New York, Vancouver, Paris, and Athens would be submerged. This could have been what happened to the sunken city in the Gulf of Cambay. Perhaps it was home to a mighty civilization older than mainstream science accepts. After all, the city is 25 miles from the shore and 120 feet deep. It had already been underwater when the first Egyptians knelt by the Nile and worshipped the sun god Ra. Building the Forbidden City.
China's Forbidden City has been the seat of dozens of emperors over the last 600 years. It was established as the political capital of China during the Ming Dynasty of the 15th century. This place is home to more secrets than you can possibly imagine. Have you ever been? Is it on your bucket list?
One of the secrets doesn't have anything to do with the bureaucracy of the Forbidden City. Instead, I want to talk about the humongous blocks that it took to build the city. Some blocks are 100 tons heavy. Compared to the stones used in building the Great Pyramid of Giza, they are huge. The biggest stones in the pyramid are found above the king's chamber and are only around 25 tons, the biggest of all being about 80 tons.
I already know what you're thinking. The Great Pyramid of Giza was made over 4,500 years ago. The Forbidden City is only 600 years old. How could I be comparing the Forbidden City to something built 4,000 years before it? To be honest, not a whole lot changed in 4,000 years. Building techniques had hardly improved from ancient Egypt to medieval China.
Keep in mind, the 15th century was when the Inca were constructing places like Machu Picchu. If you marvel at what the Inca built, your jaw should be on the floor when looking at what the Chinese built during this same century. Here's a comparison that's going to shock you. Machu Picchu was founded in 1438. The Forbidden City was founded in 1406. Yet the Forbidden City is a marvel of engineering even by modern standards. The complex has almost 10,000 buildings covering 178 acres. There are huge, opulent residences built for Chinese emperors. It's also home to the largest collection of preserved ancient wooden structures on the planet. Then there are the huge stone blocks. Scientists have always wondered how the 100-ton bricks were transported to the city. It was suggested that wheeled wagons were used, or maybe some bizarre contraption made of logs.
Now there's a new theory, one that is very controversial.
Professor Howard Stone from Princeton is an expert in viscosity and fluid interaction. He collaborated with some colleagues to come up with an explanation. Forget about wheels. The Chinese may have used nature itself. Stone and his team suggested the blocks were moved on hardened ice paths with water. You can slide just about anything across solid ice, right? One of the Forbidden City stones was moved from a quarry 43 miles away. The huge rock weighed 123 tons. It took 28 days to move. All of this information is recorded in a manuscript written 500 years ago, but the manuscript doesn't say how the rock was transported. Stone and his team think it took about 46 men, an ice path, and buckets of water to move the building block. The workers just pushed it on an ice rink. Simple as that.
It's a clever idea, but then how do you explain the Egyptians moving similarly heavy stones through the desert? They most likely used rivers and canals. Definitely not ice.
The Apostles' Eternal Bones.
One of the strangest Christmas radio messages in the world was broadcast on December 24th, 1950. It was the Pope himself announcing that the tomb of the Prince of the Apostles had been discovered. Pope Pius XII announced to the whole world that Peter's grave was found. When I say Peter, I mean the Peter, the disciple of Jesus Christ, who was given the keys to the church by the Messiah himself.
According to Christian legend, Peter was killed in Rome for his dedication to Christ. He was crucified upside down because Peter didn't believe himself worthy of dying in the same way as his Lord and Savior. That's why the inverted cross is a holy symbol that, contrary to popular belief, has nothing to do with Satan. If you missed a few of our recent videos on shocking symbols in the church, be sure to check them out to learn more about the Anticross and Satanism. Pope Pius's bizarre Christmas announcement was the culmination of strange and mysterious events, along with major disagreements by scholars. There was so much controversy surrounding the tomb that for a while, the Vatican silenced their investigation. It all began in 1939. Pope Pius XI was dead, and Pope Pius XII took over the papal throne. The new pope was convinced that Peter was buried somewhere in the Vatican grottos, which are located in the underground tomb area beneath St. Peter's Basilica. The underground area is enormous, with caverns and chambers and tunnels winding beneath the Vatican. Pius initiated an excavation, with Vatican researchers digging a tunnel underneath the altar of confession down into the crypt. In 1941, excavators hit a brick wall. Not a figurative wall, but a real wall. It was identified as part of Nero's circus, an original piece of Rome that stood 2,000 years ago at surface level. Tradition has it that Peter was crucified upside down in Nero's circus in the year 64 AD. As bombs fell across Europe in World War II, archaeologists kept digging beneath the Vatican. The tunnel brought them to a vast pagan necropolis filled with burial tombs from the Roman period. Continuing the excavation, archaeologists soon stumbled upon a simple votive shrine which they believed to be the trophy of Gaius. This was a big breakthrough because it was the trophy of Gaius that supposedly marked the original place where St. Peter was buried. It had been turned into a monument by Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, but slowly lost underneath the layers of the basilica. Margherita Guarducci was the archaeologist who deciphered ancient graffiti in the tomb near the trophy of Gaius. The name Peter was repeated over and over again. This seemed to be the place where Peter had originally been buried. They were convinced they found the tomb, yet there were no bones.
Keep watching to learn more about what the Vatican doesn't want you to know when it comes to St. Peter's bones.
Worshipping women. Which old author is your favorite? Maybe you're a Mark Twain fan or Shakespeare, or maybe you're a big fan of the Bible. After all, the Old Testament is roughly 3,000 years old. But I'd like to expand your literary horizons by introducing you to the first recorded author in the world. Her name was Enheduanna, and she was a Sumerian priestess. 4,000 years ago, Mesopotamia was one of the most advanced regions in the world. And while we might consider their civilization primitive in many ways, for example, they lived in mud brick houses, had no internet, and definitely didn't know what an NFT was. Jokes aside, they were primitive by modern standards. Yet their society was unexpectedly sophisticated in one very important way. Scientists are starting to realize that Mesopotamians were progressive when it came to women's rights. Many of their most important deities were women. They worshipped goddesses like Ishtar and Inanna, but they also respected women and their societal contributions, whether they be mothers, agricultural workers, priestesses, or nurses. There was a recent exhibition at New York's Morgan Library and Museum that had Enheduanna and her poems as its centerpiece. Curator Sidney Babcock said the exaltation of Inanna was the first time in literature that an author used the first-person singular, thereby introducing autobiography. And it was a woman. Furthermore, Enheduanna wrote about harassment, exile, abuse, and other problems women suffered during her time alive. Enheduanna was only the start of the exhibition. There were other artifacts put on display, all centering around women. Artifacts showing women making pottery, weaving at a loom, tending animals, and holding religious rituals. One object was a cylinder seal showing Queen Puabi, who ruled in 2500 BC. Another was a stone scraper with the first known inscription of a woman's name on it, circa 3000 BC. The inscription identifies the woman as Kagirgal. She appears to have been a seller in a land deal, suggesting she was a real estate mogul. The crowning jewel of the exhibition was the actual crown of Queen Puabi of Ur. She is believed to have ruled without a husband or any male relative on the throne. Some say women like Puabi, Kagirgal, and Enheduanna are proof that in Mesopotamia, women wielded as much power or more power than men. But as you can imagine, this is a controversial view. Some experts say women weren't powerful at all. Instead, the whole idea is wishful thinking on behalf of modern archaeologists. The Professor's Cabinet of Crazy. There is a museum in Peru that I cannot recommend to you enough. It's full of bizarre artifacts that have been a source of controversy since the middle of the 1900s. Nobody knows if the artifacts are real or fake, but one thing's for sure, they shouldn't even exist. Professor Javier Cabrera is the star of the bizarre story I'm about to tell you. He was living in the Peruvian city of Ica in the 1960s when one day he visited the market. At the market, there was a farmer selling rocks. These were no ordinary rocks. They were large stones with unbelievable pictures carved on them. Each stone was a little different, ranging in size from a pebble to a boulder. Each stone had a different image on it, every image more inexplicable than the last. Some of the engravings showed humans, others showed dinosaurs. The rocks had pictures of telescopes on them, flying machines, surgeries. It was crazy. Things got even crazier when the professor learned where the stones had come from. The farmer had uncovered them in some caves outside the city. They were ancient, having been made hundreds of years before anyone even knew about dinosaurs. Naturally, the professor started a collection. Before he died in 2001, Javier Cabrera had acquired roughly 15,000 stones. You can still see most of them lining the dusty shelves of the Ica Stones Museum in Peru. The scientific community is under the impression that either Cabrera lied or the farmers lied. Somebody involved made the stones themselves. An alternative theory is that the stones are legitimate, crafted by a lost civilization many centuries ago. The civilization had somehow known about modern medical surgeries and what dinosaurs looked like in the Jurassic Park movie. And while I do love a good alternative theory, I have to admit this one is tough to swallow from a logical standpoint. Javier never explained who made the stones. There have never been any ruins found to show where the stones were made. Even the most open-minded researchers don't think the Ica stones are real. But you can make up your mind for yourself. What are your thoughts on the stones? St. Peter's bones, real or not? During the years of excavations beneath the Vatican, archaeologists had found a lot of bones and a lot of bone fragments. Bones from animals and bones from humans. I can't stress enough how many bones were discovered. Most of them were poorly cataloged and stuffed into containers or straight up thrown in the trash. Archaeologists were running out of steam. They needed to find Peter's bones. Margherita Guarducci went through the poorly cataloged boxes of human remains until finding one that she believed fit the bill. The bones in the box officially became the bones of St. Peter. While the Christian community celebrated the discovery of their holiest saint's remains, scientists stood around scratching their heads, saying, it seemed crazy to mainstream scientists. There was no evidence at all that the bones had belonged to Peter. There wasn't even evidence that the bones were 2,000 years old. It was like Margarita had shrugged, pointed at some bones, and said, yeah, those are his. No evidence came until 1963, when tests confirmed the bone fragments came from a single male individual. The tests also confirmed that he lived roughly 2,000 years ago. The only bones missing were from his feet, which believers said confirmed they were Peter's bones. You know, because he was crucified upside down and had likely lost his feet in the process. In 1968, Pope Paul VI had the bones placed in sealed plexiglass containers within the Trophy of Gaius. By this time, there was a ton of controversy. The graffiti in the tomb that Margarita had translated turned out to be inconclusive. Other experts translated the graffiti as saying Peter is not here, or as a different name altogether. Antonio Ferrua was one of the most renowned archaeologists of the 20th century. Until his death in 2003, he waged a relentless battle against Margherita Guarducci. It was his belief that the Vatican was lying. They had put some random person's bones on display and pawned them off as Peter's. Even popes couldn't agree. The bones were removed from display until Pope Francis put them back in 2013. Could the bones really belong to St. Peter? And if not, where do you think his bones are? What's behind door number 1? What if I told you the ancient Egyptians understood how to create portals between this world and the realm of the dead? You'd be a little freaked out, right? And what if I told you the Egyptians learned the practice from the Mesopotamians 5,000 years ago? This is the theory behind door number 1. And by door number 1, I mean all of the false doors found in ancient tombs across Egypt. These recessed niches were a staple of Mesopotamian temples by 3000 AD. When Egyptians began building their tombs in the First Dynasty, they included false doors inside of them. Archaeologists think the Egyptians were inspired by the Mesopotamians. Then again, maybe both civilizations knew something that has since been lost to human beings. It's a little strange because false doors have also been found in places like Peru, where the Mesopotamians had absolutely no influence. What does a false door do? A false door is typically carved from a huge block of stone. Although it looked like a door, it didn't open. It gave the illusion of depth, of a door opening onto a narrow passageway. The door's frame and moldings were typically decorated in hieroglyphics and in ritual scenes pertaining to the afterlife. The Egyptians placed these doors inside of tombs because they believed they functioned as a threshold. When the spirit of the deceased left their cold, mummified corpse, it could move through the false door into the afterlife. The Egyptians believed them to be literal portals. Here's an example of a false door from the Met Museum. It's the false door of the royal sealer Neferiu, circa 2150 BC. The false door is not quite as impressive seeing it on your screen. You have to imagine finding this thing in a tomb. Then it becomes a little more magical. The controversy is, when it comes to false doors, scientists can't seem to agree. Some experts think the doors were used as decoration. Some think the Egyptians really believed in false doors having supernatural powers. Then there are those who think the doors came to life, winking a portal into existence using some sort of lost technology. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. 11,000-year-old statue. At the second most controversial temple in the world, archaeologists discovered a statue that is very inappropriate by modern standards. If you think the Statue of David is lewd, you might need somebody to shield your eyes on this one. Actually, we'll probably have to blur it out for you, just so this video doesn't get flagged. The statue isn't something you'd see erected outside a government building, that's for sure. Found in Karahan Tepe, the statue is of a male figure holding his you-know-what with both hands, like he's planning on dueling somebody with it. Aside from his indecent exposure, there's a lot going on here. The statue stands almost 8 feet tall. He's been standing in the same position for the last 11,000 years. His existence is so shocking to scientists that, according to anthropology professor Ted Banning from the University of Toronto, any interpretation of the statue is conjectural. In other words, nobody knows squat. Professor Ted said one hypothesis is that the figure was an important ancestor. He may have been the leader of a clan or lineage, or he may have been associated with the temple he was found in. The temple. Karahan Tepe is old, more than 11,000 years old, built even before the controversial city I told you about earlier, sunken off the coast of India. This temple was built around the same time that the Bible says an epic flood destroyed 99.9% of humanity, along with the Nephilim. But that's a story for another day. Karahan Tepe is the story for today. Nobody knows who built the temple, only that they must have been seriously advanced. This was a society just as technologically capable as any other in the ancient world. The temple and its strange statues were built with such excellent craftsmanship that they wouldn't look out of place in a Sumerian city. Many believe Karahan Tepe and its sister temple, Göbekli Tepe, were part of the Garden of Eden. As for the statue of the man and his you-know-what, it's not the only example of such a thing. A pendant was recently discovered in Mongolia shaped like a phallus, and it dates back 42,000 years. One of the oldest works of art in Turkey is of a man in the same position as the statue. Turns out, this was a popular theme for the ancient world. Thanks for watching! What are your thoughts on all of these controversial discoveries? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and stick around for an older video you might have missed. Bye!
Ancient Alabama, one of the deepest, darkest, and most ghoulish caves in all of North America, can be found in Alabama. It's called the 19th Unnamed Cave, and researchers recently discovered the largest known cave art in North America down in its hollow depths. The piece of art has been unseen by human eyes for over 1,000 years. It was discovered while researchers were doing 3D scans of the cave. They had missed it because of the dark, and because it has mostly faded with time. It was also drawn on the ceiling, which would have made it pretty much impossible to find without the scans. The location of this cave is a closely guarded secret. All we really know is that it's somewhere on private land in northern Alabama. Its entrance is a gaping 80-foot mouth of darkness, and inside is a long tunnel going deeper as it gets narrower. From the mouth of the tunnel going all the way down are pieces of artwork. Images were etched into the ceiling of the cave, things like birds, insects, rattlesnakes, and strange human-like figures. They were undoubtedly created by Native Americans using nothing but the flickering light of torches around the year 660 AD. This find is of major importance for one main reason. Archaeologists now know that caves all across North America are probably filled with lost artwork. Up until now, researchers have focused primarily on pictographs left behind in the desert and on rocks out in the open. Nobody had really been looking in caves, and so this has opened up a whole new world of possibility. Knucklebone Dice. In southern Israel, a rare collection of dice made from knuckle bones has been discovered. The Knucklebone Dice were inscribed with the names of Greek gods. Some of the Greek gods you may recognize, like Aphrodite, goddess of love, Hera, Zeus's wife, and Hermes, the messenger god. These knucklebone gaming dice were used much in the same way we use dice today, only 2,300 years ago. They were inscribed with the names of deities because the ancient Greeks believed they would bring them good fortune. According to the Israel Antiquities Authority, the dice were made from the knuckle bones of farm animals like goats and sheep. They were used both for gaming and for ritual divination by female sorceresses. In ancient Greece, knucklebone dice were called astragali. In total, researchers found 530 dice hiding in an underground cave complex in the Judean foothills. We're not sure what kind of games were played, if they were games of chance or games where people could win money. What we know for sure is that they doubled as magical tools in rituals. Knucklebone dice could be used with pottery shards inscribed with magical incantations. Usually, these instruments were used to try and win the favor of the gods. Number 8. Roman siege engines. In shocking archaeological news, researchers in Israel have identified the exact position of the Roman siege engines used to destroy Jerusalem almost 2,000 years ago. For a bit of background, there was a major conflict between the Jewish people in Judea and the Romans starting in the 1st century AD. The Romans had already subjugated the Jewish people, imposed high taxes, and clamped down on religious practice. This led to a revolt, with the Jewish people rising up against their Roman dictators. In retaliation, the Roman governor of Judea looted the Second Temple and arrested Jewish political figures. Emperor Nero was not happy with what was going on. The Romans were forced to abandon Jerusalem because the rebellion had turned into violent chaos. To take Jerusalem back, Roman forces led by Titus showed up at the city in the year 70 and placed it under siege for months. After several successful battles, the Romans entered the city, destroyed the Second Temple, and demolished Jerusalem to its very foundations. Now, researchers have identified where the Roman siege engines had been posted during the brutal attack. They looked at the topography, location of the ruined walls of the Second Temple, calculated how far their ballistae could fire, and then made educated guesses. The highest number of siege weapons had been placed in Cat Square, at the center of modern Jerusalem. China's fairy world. Archaeologists in China recently came across strange artifacts in the ancient city of Sanxingdui. These mysterious artifacts include bronze sculptures of serpents with human heads, gold masks, and bronze boxes inlaid with jade. The artifacts show a bizarre world of fairy tale magic imagined by the people of Sanxingdui over 4,000 years ago. According to Zhao Hao from Peking University, the artifacts demonstrate the richness of a lost Chinese civilization. The people who lived in Sanxingdui were not only some of the most advanced in the ancient world, but they were also some of the most imaginative. Ever since excavations began in the city in the 1980s, archaeologists have found over 13,000 artifacts from this Bronze Age culture. Most of the artifacts appear to show curious characters from another realm. Throughout the last 40 years, archaeologists have discovered many broken and shattered bronze artifacts discarded in large pits. This is bizarre because 4,000 years ago, bronze was incredibly valuable. It could be melted down and reused instead of buried in a pit. This has led experts to believe the broken artifacts were sacrifices. They may have been broken, burned, and buried as a way for the people of Sanxingdui to communicate with those they believed lived in the shadowy realm. These strange characters depicted in the artifacts were, to this culture, completely real. It's just that they lived in a mirror world beyond our own. This all likely had something to do with their religious views, but we don't know what those views were. The Sanxingdui culture didn't leave behind any written testimonies about themselves, so all we have to go on is the physical evidence. Ancient chompers. Without toothbrushes, absent toothpaste and floss, and without anything to rinse and gargle with, prehistoric humans had immaculate teeth. Alan Cooper, the director of the Australian Centre for Ancient DNA, says prehistoric human mouths were healthier than our own. His research has shown that hunter-gatherers had great teeth, right up until farming populations began to spread across the world. Almost as soon as people stopped being nomadic and settled down to farm the land, gum disease and cavities started plaguing our mouths. All these thousands of years later, oral disease is still running rampant. Cooper, in a study he recently published in Nature Genetics, says our diet is to blame. Cooper and his team looked at calcified plaque on the teeth of 34 ancient human skeletons. They discovered that as our diet changed with time, so did the health of our teeth. In the beginning, humans ate nothing but meat, vegetables, and nuts. But once we started farming, carbohydrates and sugars were included into our diet. At the exact same time, the composition of bacteria in our mouths changed. Suddenly, our mouths were filled with disease-causing bacteria. And by the time the Industrial Revolution came along and people started eating processed foods, our mouths took a major turn for the worse. Nowadays, our mouths are unhealthier than those of our ancestors. Humans who lived in caves by firelight had fewer cavities than we do. And now for number 5. But first, want to give a big shout out to Greg and Kenneth King. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. The Divine Olmec rulers. In Mexico, archaeologists with the National Institute of Archaeology and History discovered a pair of carved limestone reliefs. The reliefs date back to the days of the Olmec civilization. The Olmec prospered in the state of Tabasco and Veracruz before the rise of the Maya. They formed a hugely complex and advanced society starting around 900 BC, and then their cities were destroyed, and the Olmec vanished around 400 BC. These newly discovered reliefs were uncovered in the municipality of Tenosique after some locals found them hiding in the jungle. One of the reliefs is nearly 6 feet in diameter and shows the face of an ancient Olmec ruler wearing a shining crown of corn cobs. In the center of his crown is a mirror with the Olmec cross, marked by a glyph associated with the jaguar. On either side of his face are jaguar footprints, and his mouth is twisted as if releasing the roar of a great cat. If you didn't know any better, these huge stone faces would look like they came from the Maya civilization, and in a way, the Olmec was the parent culture of the Maya. Some scientists say they were the mother culture of all Mesoamerica. It's obvious how similar the artistic styles are, even centuries apart. Unfortunately, we don't know who these rulers were, or which city they may have lived in. Because they were dug out of the dirt in a rancher's field, it's safe to say whatever ancient city once stood there is now gone. Prehistoric cave structures. Deep inside an underground French cave, researchers discovered the handiwork of Neanderthals from 175,000 years ago. It was one of the most impressive Neanderthal discoveries ever made, and suggests we've been seriously underestimating what our ancient ancestors were capable of. These structures are composed of about 400 pieces of stalagmites, long pillars of minerals that grow from the ground in caves. 984 feet past the entrance of the Bruniquel cave in France, Neanderthals smashed apart the stalagmites to create building blocks. These stalagmites were ripped from the floor of the cavern, rearranged to form walls, and then, well, nobody is really sure what happened next. Nobody knows if the Neanderthals used the walls for primitive housing, if they were just bored, or what was going on. The truly unbelievable part of the discovery is that the subterranean walls were constructed before modern humans arrived in Europe. Neanderthals were building underground structures roughly 135,000 years before humans ever moved out of Africa. It's very strange, and scientists aren't really sure what to make of it right now. Mysterious Spanish graves. One of the oldest Muslim cemeteries in all of Spain is an archaeological site on the Iberian Peninsula. Archaeologists recently dug up 433 graves, many of them dating back to the first years of the Islamic conquest of Spain. The find has confirmed that the region, which has long been a frontier between Islam and Christianity, was once dominated by Muslim rulers from the south. Then, after roughly centuries of domination, the Muslim rulers were kicked out by their Christian enemies, and their side of history was forgotten. The graves date from between the 8th and 12th centuries and were found near the town of Tauste in the Ebro Valley. That's about 25 miles from Zaragoza. The skeletons were buried according to Muslim funerary tradition. The sheer number of bodies is a clear indication that the nearby town was predominantly Islamic for centuries. This is despite the fact that in the local history books, you won't find a single mention of any Muslim society. It goes to show how easily history can be manipulated by those with the tools to do so, but it also shows how useful archaeology can be in resurrecting the truth. The boy with the yo-yo. The very first depiction of somebody playing with a yo-yo is on a Greek vase from 2,500 years ago. The yo-yo, believe it or not, is the second oldest known toy. According to historians, the first and oldest toy in human history is a doll. But just where in the world did the yo-yo come from? And for that matter, how did it show up in Greece in the 5th century BC? Most historians agree the yo-yo was birthed in China, invented in the East, and then brought to ancient Greece and the Philippines. In the Filipino language, yo-yo translates to come-come. These toys were made from wood, terracotta, metal, or clay, and were the coolest things around. They became so popular that the Greeks used them as offerings to the gods, and gave them to young boys during rituals when they came of age. The vase depicting this ancient toy comes from the year 440 BC. It's currently on exhibit at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, along with physical fragments of one of the earliest yo-yos in history. Just like how most popular children's toys today are decorated in pictures of superheroes, ancient yo-yos in Greece were decorated with pictures of the most trending Greek gods. Ancient Assyrian tunnels. In Iraq in 2014, ISIS extremists went on a rampage, destroying ancient shrines and blasting apart antiques. They were posting videos on social media of their destruction of history, enraging people all over the world. But while they were in the midst of senseless vandalism, they accidentally uncovered a treasure of ancient statues dating back to the Assyrian Empire. Long before Islam, before Iraq, and before Persia, there was Assyria. They ruled as a major city-state in Mesopotamia from between the 21st century BC, or 4,000 years ago. From the 14th to the 7th century BC, they were a mighty empire. Assyria was one of the most advanced kingdoms at the dawn of humanity. It's the Assyrians' ancestors who still live across much of the world today, primarily in Iraq and Turkey. Back to the modern age, the extremists discovered the statues in a tunnel that they had dug underneath the shrine of the prophet Jonah. The statues date back to the 8th century BC and were probably part of the palace of King Esarhaddon. Soon after the discovery of the statues, the Iraqi forces pushed ISIS out of Mosul, and so, for at least a while, the archaeological treasures were safe. But throughout the fighting, ISIS successfully destroyed an estimated 66 archaeological sites in the Mosul region. They also pillaged over 700 archaeological items, according to Iraqi ministry official Salim Khalaf, for sale on the black market. One of the most important places they destroyed was the ancient city of Nimrud. Thanks for watching! Which of these mysterious discoveries did you find the most fascinating? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time! Bye!